Howdy and welcome to another Adam Gibbs non-adventure. Now I've kind of succumbed to my subscriber pressure in that a lot of people have been asking about the Pano image that I had in my last video and how I went about processing that. So this week I've decided to show you how I went about that. And some of you are probably going, oh really, another processing video? If you're wondering where I am right now, I'm actually at my mum and dad's place on Vancouver Island. We own the house or the cottage next door that we're slowly renovating. So this is kind of my base right now. Now, unfortunately, I just have my little laptop. So I'm gonna have to edit this on my laptop. Which isn't too bad. It's just that the screen is so small. It's hard to sometimes it's hard to open up all the different menus and windows at the same time. So I have to keep closing everything. So bear with me. Right. Without further delay, why don't I get stuck right in and show you how I went about processing that image. All right. All right. Now I've already gone through the process of making this into a Pano image. This was actually from 5 separate vertical images, and the edited version, it's quite a bit different. There is some nice light in here, especially on this central Douglas fir and around here, but you'll notice that in this area here there's hardly any light whatsoever, and then this area over on the left, it's quite a bit brighter. So the first thing I do with an image such as this is try and figure out, okay, so what are the most important things in the photograph? What do I want to draw people's attention to? And the way that we do that is by brightening and darkening certain areas. So I use dodging and burning a lot in my processing, and that's pretty much all I do in a lot of my images. If you're not sure how to put together a Pano in Lightroom, then I'll just leave a link up here to one of my other videos that shows you how to do that. Just want to save a bit of time here and not drag this out too long. This area here, I've already established that it's quite dark, so I want to bring the illusion of light in there. So how do we do that? Well, there's a little bit of light in here. You can see it's a slightly lighter back there, slightly lighter back here. But I want to draw your attention to this tree here. And you'll notice that this has quite a bright spot on the side and dark. So I'm going to do the same thing with this tree. And also I'm going to add contrast or the illusion of light to this area here, back here, and also back here. This area here is a little bit messy, so I'm going to darken that up, and actually this log here is quite bright along the whole of the log. I don't want to draw people's attention out of the frame, so I'm going to darken this area as well. And then I'm going to also add contrast to give the illusion of depth in this image, because it is a little bit flat, especially in this area here. Okay, so let's just get out of the full screen here. Now, the first thing I'll do in Lightroom after I've made a Pano is I'll do general adjustments. Now, again, I've already done those, and if you're not sure or you want to see what I did in another image, I'll just leave a link up here. Like I said, I don't want to drag this out too long. Now, there isn't an awful lot I'm going to do in Lightroom at this point, other than I'm just going to do a general adjustment, darken some of these areas here. So I'm just going to pick the circular tool here and just run right across. Now, as you can see, I have my screen is pretty small, so it's hard to do some of these adjustments. Okay, now I'm just going to click on this show selected mask. I want to be able to see where these adjustments are going to be made, and it's a little bit too feathered, so I'm just going to bring that down just a tad. Okay. And all I'm going to do is just darken this, so bring the exposure down. And you can see it's darkened this area, and this area here. Now, some of the things I do are a little bit counterintuitive, like I might darken an area, like this area here is really dark, but then I'll brighten it up later. Some people might disagree with the way I go about things. Personally, I just do things what works for me, and I suggest that you do the same thing. If you find a technique that works for you, then just stick with it. If people say, well, no, you shouldn't be doing it that way, just ignore them. Just ignore them. Do it your way. If it works, great. Right. Now I'm also going to warm, okay, we'll just get out of that. I'm just going to warm this whole image up just a little bit. Okay. You'll notice now that all of a sudden this area in the center is quite a bit brighter, and that's kind of what I wanted. But I'm also going to add light in Photoshop over here and here. So now we'll just open this up in Photoshop and continue from there. Okay, now I've opened up the image in Photoshop, and the first thing I want to do is create some contrast or the illusion of light in this area here. So now I happen to have Tony Kuiper's panel, which makes things quite a bit quicker and easier. I'm going to click on the dodge tool here, and it's opened up a layer here, you'll see. And I'm going to brighten up the side of this Douglas fir here, and then darken the other side, kind of like this tree here, to give that kind of illusion. So now I could either do it in just plain old white paint, but I think in this case I'm going to actually add a little bit of warmth. So I'm going to click on this white box here and just go over slightly and pick a color. That should do it. Just a slight warm yellow. Click OK. Now B for brush. I'm already in my brush tool. And opacity, I like to build up slowly. So in this case, I've kept it at 10%. And just let me just zoom in just a little bit here. Okay, B for brush. Now I'm going to start up the top here. So I'm just going to click that once, then hold down the Shift key and click again. And you'll notice that all of a sudden it brightened up that area. Click the Shift key again. Now you don't have to do it this way. You can just paint it in. I just find it a little bit quicker to hold down the Shift key and okay, so that's brightened that up quite a bit. And now what I'm going to do is do a burn layer. So I'm going to darken it. So just click on the burn layer there. Now we're in black, and I'm going to leave it at black. And the same thing again in brush, 10%. And I'm just going to go up and down this side of the tree and darken it. Now you can go as far or as little as you want, so you'll see that I've darkened that considerably, and I've lightened that considerably. And if I back off, you'll notice that all of a sudden it gives the illusion of light hitting the side of this tree here. Now actually I was a bit sloppy here. You see how it's lighter here and then darker here. So I'm just going to pick B, make the brush a little bit smaller, and just paint this area in here. Okay, I'm going to go back to the dodge, go back to dodge, and I'm just going to brighten this up even more. I'm going to go quite dramatic with this. There. And I'm going to brighten up this area here. I'm going to brighten this up even more. And then in here. The whole idea is to try and draw your viewer's attention to specific areas in the frame. And this dodging and burning is a really effective way to do that. And photographers have been doing that for years and years. It used to be done in the darkroom. Now, of course, it's done in mostly Photoshop, Lightroom. The concept is exactly the same. All right, let's just back off there. So now you can see that we're starting to brighten up this area and give that illusion of light. Okay, now generally speaking, I very rarely touch the saturation slider or adjust saturation in my images. The way I usually add saturation is just by adding contrast. And I think with this image, I do want to add quite a bit of contrast, especially to the shadows and the highlights to give it that illusion of depth again. So one way that I do that to selective areas, rather than dodging and burning everything, is to either use levels or curves and then mask out certain areas that I don't want that effect on. So as an example, with this image, we'll just open up the curves here. And if you click on this little hand here with the arrows on it, let me just zoom in here. So I want to add contrast to the shadowed side of this tree, but not affect the highlights necessarily. So I'll click on this little hand, and if you click once on different areas in the frame, you'll notice that these little pinpoints come up, and they're just making little markers on the line, on your graph line there. But I want to darken the shadows. So now what I can do is click on the shadows and slowly bring my graph down, and you'll notice that it's not affecting the highlights, it's just affecting anything below these points here, if that makes sense. So I'm going to add quite a bit of contrast, like that. Now if I zoom out, you'll notice that it's made the image quite a bit darker, obviously, but it's given the illusion of that light. It's made it even more prominent. But I don't want this effect on everything. So what I'm going to do here is, oh, that should be above that. What I'm going to do here is invert that mask and just selectively paint in areas that I want that contrast on, if that makes any sense. So if I click on the mask here and just press Command I on a Mac, you'll notice that it reverts back to how it was before without the adjustments. Now I'll press B for brush, and I'm going to go to about, let's see here, let's go to about 30%. So I'm just going to press 3 and make sure that my brush is on white. I'm just going to zoom in here and I'm just going to start painting this in. And what will happen is those adjustments that I made will slowly build up in the areas that I'm painting. Now, there isn't any proper way to do this. It's all by sight and what appeals to you. I definitely want to darken the shadows of this tree. I don't really want to affect the highlights on the sunny side of this tree too much, because it's already getting quite bright. Okay, let's just zoom out here. And if we click on this little eye here, you can see the contrast that I've added locally to this little area here, but not affected the rest of the image. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this tree here. Now I might actually even brighten that up a little bit more a bit later on, but we'll just leave it for now. This area here, I want to add contrast. So you can see that we're slowly building up the areas that we want to be prominent in the photograph, if that makes sense. So we'll just zoom in here. So I want to add a little bit of contrast in there. So you notice the blacks are getting darker and the whites aren't being affected too much. Now we might brighten those up just a little bit more later on, but we're just working on the shadows for now. Now I don't want to affect this area because I'm going to brighten that up considerably, but this area here we can darken even more. I would imagine this looks great in the fall, so I'm looking forward to going back to this area actually. Now of course I'll go back and there'll be some of those trees might have fallen down, or things change quite drastically. It's amazing. So as you can see, I'm just slowly painting in areas. Now I'm definitely going to brighten up this tree because I want to add a little bit of separation from this tree from the background. Just press zoom here. Sorry, B, and we'll just keep painting this area. We're still adding contrast to this area. We'll darken beneath that tree there. Add a bit of contrast in here. Okay, I think that'll do that for now. Okay, now what I'd like to do now is you'll notice that this area here is coming together quite nicely, but this is looking rather dark in here. Now that's because I darkened it earlier, but I'd like to brighten up some of these areas in here, especially kind of in here and this moss here. So I'm just going to zoom in on that area, and again, I'm going to grab a dodge layer. So there's our dodge layer there. Again, I'm going to use a slightly different color for this. So I'm just going to go in up a little bit. Use a reddish yellow, orange, I guess you would call that. Right, B for brush. We're on the color. Now make sure you bring the opacity down. In this case, I'm going to bring it down to 10. And I'm just going to slowly paint this in and brighten these areas up a bit. So not only is it brightening up a little bit, but it's also adding a little bit of color in there. So some of you are asking, okay, so how do you get your forest to look such a nice color? But this is one of the ways that I do that. In certain areas, I'll just add color. Not a lot of color. It's very, very, very slight. And see, if we click on you can see where I've dodged those areas. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'd like to brighten them up a bit more, but if I keep doing it this way, then I'm going to affect the background. I don't know if you noticed that as I click there, you can see that it's also brightening the background, so you get that kind of weird halo effect. So there's enough contrast there now that I could probably just use some curves. And if I zoom in on this area here, again, I can just use, I can just pinpoint certain areas. In this case, it's the shadows. That's probably a bit too much. How does that look? Let's just zoom out there. That Looks pretty good. You don't want to overdo it because then it just looks too odd. See, that's overdoing it. Okay, that'll work. Now you've noticed that it has affected the whole image, and we don't want that. So go down to the layer mask here and Command I, and that just masks everything out, and then we can just paint that effect in again. So we pick brush, it's on white, we can go up to 50% is fine, and then we're just going to paint that in. So you're painting this in and it's not really affecting the shadows in the background. We can also do it up here because it's kind of almost the same tonality. So again, it's not going to affect the shadows so much. Just have to be careful that we don't overdo it with the highlights here. You'll notice that that might be getting a little bit too bright. So if you just hit B for brush and then X and make it into a black paintbrush, so we're masking it back in, and you can just paint that back in so it's, notice how it's darkened up again. Now we'll press X, make it white again. Maybe we'll lower the opacity down to 30 so it doesn't do it so quickly. And we'll just slowly paint these areas in. So now what we're doing is we're brightening up the highlights and not affecting the shadows. Just zoom out a bit here. I just love these mossy trees are just beautiful. So this is this tree here is actually a cedar, western red cedar, and then the others are old Douglas fir. Douglas fir don't grow as wide as cedar, but they grow much taller. Some of these trees, I believe, are 200 feet or 300 feet. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay. So as you can see, the image is slowly coming together. Now I just want to brighten up this little tree here so it's separate from the background. I'm probably going to darken this a little bit more and brighten up this tree just a tad more. So let's just start with this little tree here. I'm just going to grab another dodge layer here, and okay, my brush, make sure it's on white, or actually why don't we go with a slightly yellow color again. It's very slight, probably won't even notice. 10%, so just press 1 or type it in there, and let's just zoom in a little bit more here. Okay, and I'm just going to slowly paint this in. Again, I'm going to let's see here, I'm just going to use the shift key and just a bit lazy that way, just do it quickly that way. So you notice all of a sudden it's a little bit brighter than the background. It just separates it a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to zoom into this little tree, or this big tree, and going to brighten that up a bit. See, depth is all about perception and darks and lights. So if you can build up your image, I mean not every image, but scenes like this, contrast works very well. So you can direct people's attention by adding or subtracting contrast. See, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create another burn layer, and I'm just going to darken up this section here just ever so slightly. So B, make sure it's on black, 10% again, and I'm just going to slowly darken this area. It just adds some separation from from this broken tree here. Now some of these things probably just aren't very noticeable, but cumulatively all together, as you slowly build things up, they are noticeable. Okay, we're going to darken this just ever so slightly. And we'll just go back to the dodge layer here. I'm just going to lighten this a little bit more. Oops, wrong brush. And this section here. Not the whole tree. I don't want people's eye to be drawn out through the top of it. Just a little bit along there. Oops. Just zoom in here. And just going to add a little bit more light in here. This section here, I'm going to darken again. Oops. Got to make sure you pick the right color brush there. White to lighten, dark to darken. Okay, we just zoom out again. And B. Okay, how's that looking? Let's see here. It's starting to come together pretty good. Okay. Now we're almost done, and then we'll just add the piece de resistance. Just gonna brighten up. Let's zoom in here. Sometimes a lot of these scenes you'll get reflected light, so you get light bouncing off one tree into another tree, or there might be something there that'll bounce light into the shadows. I quite like the texture of this cedar here, so I'm just going to bounce a little bit of light in there. So I'm going to pick a slightly warmer color again, and I've opened up another dodge layer. We're at B and 10%, and I'm just going to add a little bit of light in here, not too much, don't want to overdo it again. I can't stress it enough, it's all about subtlety. I mean, there have been a number of times where I've overdone it, and sometimes you have to go back to images and redo them. I must admit, this is a little hard redoing this image. I was quite excited the first time I did it, but the second time is kind of lost a bit of its luster. But I think I'm doing a reasonably good job here. I'm just going to brighten up this little fern here. Just a little bit. There we go. Right. I think we're almost done. Let's just back off here. Sometimes it's a good idea to press the F key, and it will give you a full view of the image without all the clutter. Now I'm not sure about this. That might be a bit too, looks a bit cloudy in there. So we'll have to go back in there and have a look at that. But the rest of the image is starting to come together quite nicely. Okay, now I've dodged this a little bit strangely. It has this kind of a fuzzy look to it. So what I'm going to do here is open up a curves layer here, and I'm just going to add some contrast between the background and the area that I've lined up, the tree that I've lined up. So just click on the background there and bring that down just a little bit. And then the tree, I'll click on that and just bring that up so I have a little bit of an S-curve. Curve. Okay, let's just zoom out there. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Okay, so we're just going to invert that mask. So make sure you've clicked on the mask, Command I, and then again, B for brush, white paint. We can bring it up to, I don't know, 40% is probably fine. We'll just zoom in just a little bit. And I'm just going to paint that area in. And you can see that the contrast has somewhat come back. Let's see there. I'll just click on that. Ah, that's great. Okay. I might have darkened that tree too much, actually. Okay, click back on the mask, invert the paint, so X, black, B, and we're just going to paint on the trees at the back there. They're looking just a little bit too dark. See, that's the nice thing about masking, is that you can go back and forth with a white brush or a black brush and reverse your mistakes or paint things in. So if you don't like a certain area, you know, you can just go back and correct it. So it's great that way. Okay, the last thing I like to do on some of my images, not all of them, is add a little bit of Gaussian blur, or the Orton effect, as some people call it. I realize it's not everybody's cup of tea. The reason why I like it, it really gives that ethereal kind of soft light appearance to images. So the way that I do it, there are a number of different ways you can accomplish this. The way that I've been doing it lately is, first of all, you want to make a layer or a copy of everything that you've done. So on a Mac, it'd be Shift, Option, Command, E. And then from there, I go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I generally keep it around, I don't know, just under 40 pixels. And I'll go up to opacity and bring it down to about 17%. And then down here, we're going to go to brightness contrast. Now I'm going to click on this little box here, so it just affects that layer. And I'm just going to brighten and add contrast. I mean, there's no set way of doing things. You just do it to the way that you like it. Okay, that'll do. I quite like that. And that's pretty much it. Now, I don't necessarily want that effect on everything, primarily just the background, because, you know, whenever we look at a scene, you kind of have a little bit of haze in the background. This particular day, there wasn't any haze, but I'm giving the illusion that there was a bit of haze or mist in the background. So I'm just going to put those two layers, put those two layers into a group. So Command G, and I'm going to add a mask to those two layers. And again, B for brush. This time we're going to use black paint, probably around 40% would be good. And I'm just going to paint the areas that I don't want affected by the Gaussian blur, primarily the areas that are closest to me. So this tree here, this log here, you don't have to be that accurate, because the effect is not so noticeable that you're going to notice if you go over any lines or anything like that. And there we have it. That's pretty much it. Okay, so what I'll do for you, I'll just grab everything here and we'll put it into a group so you can see all of the different things that I did to this image. So there's the raw file, and there's the file with all the dodging and burning and all the other stuff that I mucked about with. All right, is everybody still awake? I hope you enjoyed this video. As I've said in my previous processing videos, I don't generally go this overboard with images, and if I do, it's usually just dodging and burning. Somewhat like a traditional darkroom, except in a digital darkroom. Anyway, regardless, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions about processing or anything photography related, please put them in the comments below. And if you did enjoy this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up. And if you could share it as well, that would be awesome. All right, until next time, thanks ever so much. And we'll catch you next time, I guess. All right, bye-bye.
Stepping on your roller coaster, going down, but I never felt this high. Biggest ride of the century.